It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance, everybody. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always is my trusty sidekick, my lead, my partner, my co-captain, my everything, Andy Grabner. Andy, how are you doing today?
Did you just captain? You know that it's always me when I go captain.
It's a co-captain.
Yeah. No, I was always, you always give me crap when I say captain.
Well, I was not saying, I was saying in terms of like a captain of a ship, and we're, we're two ships sailing in the distance or whatever in the sunlight. I don't know. There's some stupid saying. It's a little bit romantic there, but we won't get into anything romantic.
We don't want to shy away people.
Episode. This is not a romantic episode. Have we ever had? I don't think we've ever had any hint of romance in the episodes. Like not even a Valentine's Day episode.
I think today we'll talk about the romance between maybe logs, traces, and events. Who knows? Coming together under one roof.
Good. You're so good at that, Andy. You're so good at the segues. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present Andy Grabner.
Thank you.
And I want to segues.
I was just saying my first company I worked for was actually called Segway Software, where we built Field Performer. So I think Segway is just kind of in my nature. But let's stop with the introduction and talking about ourselves. Today's topic is OpenTelemetry. I mean, OpenTelemetry is obviously the Rome. I liked it. So Armin, this is a perfect way to introduce yourself, because you just brought up an even better way of talking about how can we bring romance into this. Armin, you go right away. What did you just say?
Sure. You brought up romance, and I thought of the marriage of OpenCensus and OpenTracing. And that brings us to OpenTelemetry, today's topic.
Exactly. And Armin, as you're already kind of took over, do you want to maybe start actually with introducing yourself, and then we also bring Dan in, because I know we actually have two guests today.
Sure. So my name's Armin. I'm a team lead and software engineer at Dynatrace. And as part of that, I contribute a lot to OpenTelemetry, where I'm on the technical committee. I started at the company a couple of years ago, at first on the One Agent, later on the One Agent SDK, which is kind of a proprietary way of extending the agent. And then the natural segue to move on was to go to the OpenTelemetry project and contribute there.
Great. And first of all, thanks again for the great intro on kind of segue on OpenTelemetry. OpenTelemetry is a big topic for us. That's why we wanted to make sure we actually get people on the show that not just talk about it in theory, but actually are actively involved in that important project. And now let's also open up the stage for Daniel Dyla. Hello, welcome to the show. You may introduce yourself quickly.
Yeah, hey there. I'm Dan Dyla. I also work for Dynatrace. I'm an open source architect on Armin's team, on the open source team. I'm primarily working on OpenTelemetry these days, but I also work on the W3C tracing, distributed tracing working group, among some other things. And I guess we'll get more into what OpenTelemetry is and what it means later, but I'm on the governance committee there, and I also maintain the JavaScript client.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Can you quickly fill us in, because there's a lot of things it seems you do in your day-to-day job. Can you tell us how much time you actually spend in, let's say, open source project governance things, like administrative parts? I don't know, being in meetings, in sync meetings, working on Git issues. How much time can you kind of say this? How much time do you spend in what I would say administrative part, which is very important, or the community-driven part versus the actual implementation?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of transitioning more and more to the community aspect of it every day. When I first started working on OpenTelemetry, I would say I was coding 80% and doing community management 20%. And now it's almost the opposite. Now it's more like 20% coding and 80% community management. And by that, I mean not just like, stuff like this, but pull request reviews, issue triage, governance topics, running the meetings, stewarding new members and stuff like that.
But this also means then, if I hear this correctly, you obviously have more people contributing, and obviously these people then are contributing through pull requests, which need to be reviewed. And so the community itself, the contributing community is growing, and they obviously need some guidance. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The community is growing, and the amount of code that I do as a percentage of my time has certainly gone down, but that doesn't mean that the project itself is getting less. When I first started on it, it was really only me and a couple other people on the JavaScript side of things, and it has really grown. So as it grows, it's obviously good for the project, but it means that there's a lot more administrative overhead, I guess you would call it.
Yeah. Armin, is there anything else from your end that you would like to add, some from your perspective in the groups that you are actively involved in?
So I'm mostly active in the specification, so less coding is involved there. The only code we touch there is Markdown and some things with the build tooling to make the spec pass and so on. But in the specification, it's a lot of issues and PRs going on there, and as being part of the TC, that also involves some housekeeping around things like GitHub repo organizations, community membership, and those kind of things.
And it's really, thank you so much for all of this work, because I think this is often, from the outside at least, I think missed, that this is very important work, because with this work, nothing would actually move along, nothing would be coordinated, and the output wouldn't be what it is. And therefore, thank you for also giving us some insights into what it actually takes to run open source projects successfully. Yeah.
So I think that the governance part is often underestimated, the amount of time that will go into that, because people think open source, easy, someone else will write the code for you on your behalf, and you don't have to do anything, right? But luckily that naive approach is not what experienced people think of, but some might. And at first I also thought that it was less governance and less community work, and more progress moving on. But on every issue and every PR, you have a lot of people with a lot of opinions on it. And so in the spec, things naturally move a bit slower. So in the OpenTelemetry specification, that is.
Looking at this, what we just talked about, there's a lot of pull requests, a lot of work, a lot of coordination work going on, a lot of making sure people can actually become active and be productive. What are the metrics, KPIs that you guys are looking at to measure the actual output, and also kind of compare a little bit how other open source projects are running? Just to give an example, I mean, maybe you're looking at the number of pull requests that are kind of open versus how long do they take. Are there any metrics that we should be aware of, what open source communities actually are looking for? Because when I think about this, a lot of new people are entering the open source space and they want to contribute. And there's 1,000 projects to choose from. Are there any good health indicators of, hey, this is actually a great run project, which I assume yours are?
Yeah, so I guess since I'm the governance committee member, I should take that one. The things that we primarily look at are, how long from when an issue is open to the first contact from a maintainer and then until it's closed. And then same for pull requests, time to the first review and then time to merge or close. It is part of the mandate of the governance committee to look at those things periodically. Honestly, I wish we looked at them more often, but at this point, I would say we look at it quarterly or twice a year, give or take. And from there, we can decide, where identifying the shortcomings is the first step to fixing them, right? So we had, for instance, a year ago, we were having a problem with, I guess, what you would call throughput. We had a lot of pull requests being opened that would just sit for a really long time. and as the governance committee, it's our job to come up with processes and such that that lower that time, at least until someone's contacted. Because as a first contributor, especially first contributor, it's a terrible experience to open an issue or a pull request, and then it just sits for a month and nobody has responded to it, and you just feel ignored. Especially when you can see that there are things going on in the project. So there are people working on this. Why are they not interacting with my pull request? And a lot of that comes from just dynamics within the project that you have in most of the what we call special interest groups that maintain a component. You have like a core group of people that contribute regularly. And you have maybe 5 or 6 people that are used to seeing each other. They're used to seeing pull requests from each other and stuff like that. And then when someone new comes in, it's just not a part of their regular day-to-day flow. So as the governance committee, we try to see what we can do to bridge that gap a little bit.
It's interesting because when you think about it, you're all volunteering basically, and there's no, obviously people are taking lead roles and trying to help push this stuff, but number one, it's a matter of how much time can you put into that. And also for anybody who is trying to make improvements, it becomes a lot more challenging in an open source project, I would imagine, to affect change when you don't have the implicit, let's call it authority behind you of being a hired manager at a company, right? So I imagine there's a lot more diplomacy involved, and just even trying to get people to move along. It's a passion project, and Andy, you faced a lot of that within Captain, I think, right? In terms of how do we get it moving along? How do we keep the enthusiasm and the momentum moving? So it's yes, I think probably things most people probably haven't thought of when it comes to open source projects, right? The real daily running of it. So it's interesting to hear this perspective, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and of course, ideally, it's a meritocracy, right? Like whoever is doing the best work should be moved up or promoted or whatever it is that you call it. But the reality is that there is a lot of diplomacy involved and stuff like that. And even if someone is a genius contributor, and they come in and they make their first PR, and nobody knows that they're a genius. So there is definitely like a progression that you have to make, for your first PRs and such. And most of our TC and GC members have been around with the project for a really long time. And there are obviously disadvantages to that in terms of getting new contributors in, but there's also advantages. Like the people that have been around for a really long time are more familiar with the vision of the project and the long-term roadmap and where we see it going and stuff like that, which prevents us from having too many course corrections along the way, right? It's a good thing that everybody is moving towards the same goal.
And maybe the last question on this before I want to give you the chance to also talk a little bit more about OpenTelemetry, but the last question on this, there are clearly people that just come in from anywhere in the world and try to contribute. However, the two of you, employed by Dynatrace, you are dedicated on these projects, which means in open source projects like OpenTelemetry and others, we have organizations that see the value in it and actually contribute engineering resources full time to really drive these things forward. Does this help? I assume so, right? At least it helps to really move things along in the direction that also some of the vendors like we are really also want it, but always in collaboration, obviously, with the bigger community.
So, I think everybody has this idea of open source projects as being done by volunteers. And in a lot of cases, that's true. But in most cases, I would say at least for larger projects, you tend to find that most of the people working on the project are working for some company that is interested in moving the project forward. And as a company, there's several ways you can contribute to a project. One way is by giving money, but in a lot of cases, that doesn't really help as much as contributing engineering resources and product management resources and things like that. Money contributions are never discouraged, but a lot of times they're not the most effective way to help. So you do find a lot of organizations donating engineering resources and things like that. And that's why a lot of the contributors tend to be from organizations. But that said, we definitely do have quite a few contributors that are working in their free time, whether they are just open source, passionate about open source, or whether they are OpenTelemetry users and their company just doesn't have time to dedicate their own time, but they identify shortcomings and they say, as a user, I want this to be as good as it can possibly be, and things like that. But yeah, the bulk of the contributions do tend to come from organizational resources.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, thanks both of you for giving us the insights, kind of from the outside in, especially to understand what's actually happening when running open source projects. Now, OpenTelemetry, right? The romance between OpenCensus and OpenTracing. I think I need to write this. This is going to become part of a child. I love child, yeah. Brian and I, we had guests in the past talking about OpenTelemetry, but I think as this project is moving so fast, a lot of things have changed, and therefore it would really be great for those that listen to our previous episodes, but also those that might be completely new, just to give everybody that is listening an update. Kind of OpenTelemetry from a high-level perspective. What is it? Who is supporting it? Who is the beneficiary of it? How does it look like if I want to use it? And so I would like to pass it over to either of you to give me a little overview, and our listeners, obviously, about OpenTelemetry.
So the general high-level concept of it luckily has not changed since your last episode. It still fulfills the same purpose, and it can be described as an API, an SDK, and other tooling and integrations that are designed for collecting telemetry, for processing it, and then for exporting it to certain data sinks that can analyze this data. And the beneficiaries are all people that have anything running in production, because on the long run, the vision would be that everything out there would come instrumented with ideally OpenTelemetry out of the box, so that you can just magically monitor everything that you deploy in your environments with it.
I was just going to say, I think the key differentiator, not the differentiator, but one thing to highlight for people new to this concept is this is the collection and exporting of this data. It's not the processing or consumption that you still need either a vendor tool like ours to do or another third-party analysis tool to ingest all of this data and make sense of it. Correct. The OpenTelemetry piece is the collection and exporting of that data. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is. So there are tools to work with that data, to analyze it. In open source, there is Jaeger, for example, that can handle traces, and obviously vendors that have their own backends to import such data. But the OpenTelemetry itself is about collecting and managing and processing or pre-processing the data.
And the way I see it, and Brian, I'm sure you see it too, the reason why organizations are really looking forward to OpenTelemetry, at least one of the arguments I hear is people want to become kind of independent of any vendor. They don't want to build in something proprietary. Right? Everybody wants to be. I think this is also why Kubernetes, at least in theory, is great, because Kubernetes itself is open. Whether you run it on premise or whether you run it in one of the cloud vendors in their managed offering, it doesn't matter. You can always move around, and you kind of really get this hybrid cloud becoming a reality. And you can just run your containers anywhere. And I guess with OpenTelemetry it would be the same. As long as everything is instrumented with OpenTelemetry, you get your metrics, you get your logs, you get your traces, and then you can obviously then switch backend tools, as you said. You can switch from an open source to a commercial. We can switch around, or you can let people decide on what they want to do with the data.
One issue, though, I have when people talk about that idea of vendor lock-in, and I know this is probably a bit of a hot topic in some circles, is that, like, if we're talking about everything except for serverless, right, or some of the brand new stuff, there really is no vendor lock-in, because this is not 1997 or 2005 or whatever year you want to go back to, where the only way to instrument the code and collect this data is to build stuff and write stuff into your code. You know, all of the vendors are doing it dynamically, so there really is no lock-in. You're just dynamically capturing the data with one agent versus another. But whenever vendor lock-in is brought up, it's always done in this boogeyman style of, oh, you're going to have to instrument your code. And like, what? That's like such an old-fashioned view. It just kills me. Obviously, when we start going into things like serverless, where there are no agents and things like that, this becomes a reality, right? But most people are talking about OpenTelemetry in combination with Kubernetes, which is still talking about JVMs, containers, and everything. I don't know. I just wanted to get that off my chest because it really bothers me when I hear the whole vendor lock inside. I see the point they're making, but they're using like an ancient argument against it, which bothers me. And I don't know if maybe you guys have a different, view on that, because obviously I'm only getting it from my perspective. So.
Yeah, of course. I would say that there are high quality agents that do instrument automatically and stuff like that, and in a lot of cases they work really well. But there's always like corner cases and edge cases. Like serverless is one that you brought up, but there are others as well, where automatically instrumenting applications either misses some key component that's maybe not missed in a technical perspective, but like is important to your particular business case, right? Like a metric isn't captured that is important to your business, but is maybe not common from a technical perspective, or maybe some API is particularly difficult to observe from the outside. What really makes OpenTelemetry different, and I think was what the core value proposition of it is, that because it's open source, you could have libraries and open source applications and stuff like that build it in as like first party support. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking from the outside, you can of course capture a lot of things, but if you're the developer of a library, you're always going to know what's important at a much like deeper level than could ever be done by an outside agent or something like that. So if you have like a database driver, for example, that builds in first-party support for OpenTelemetry, the data is most likely more reliable, more stable, and more resistant to changes and updates in the library. For example, if a new version of a database driver is released, and some outside instrumentation breaks, whereas a first-party built-in instrumentation would be considered as a part of that update.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are fantastic arguments for OpenTelemetry. I'm not against any of that. I just don't see the vendor lock-in side, but that's more a feature, function, and benefit, and more out of the box stuff. Anyway,
maybe to the vendor lock-in, I just have one comment on this where I can also see it valid. Let's say you have one APM tool and it provides you, let's say, 10 metrics, and you need them, and then you're switching to another tool and you don't get the same metrics. It means you're kind of locked in, because in order to get out of it, you need to figure out how to get this data that you always had in the other tool with the new tool. If you only base on everything on OpenTelemetry, you don't care about that tool because you know that you always get the data, however, whatever backend system you have. I think this is one of the arguments with the lock-in, right? That I could understand and I see. I got a question now to both of you. I think the way now that I see it, right? If I'm looking at it again from a very naive perspective, I have the option that developers instrument their code, and we encourage them if they build libraries or their own applications because they know what's best. Then I can also see that if I am a developer and I'm using third-party libraries, hopefully somebody instrumented it. But what about the status of dynamic instrumentation? Because I believe that already exists, at least for some technologies. So we have some automated agents in OpenTelemetry that also inject OpenTelemetry. Can any one of you fill us in here? Because maybe I don't want to instrument my code manually. And I think that option also exists. And then if you're not the experts, then feel free to say this. But at least I think there are some auto instrumentation options available. Just be interested to hear an update.
Yeah, I think everybody kind of has a different definition of what auto instrumentation means. And it sounds like what you're referring to is something where I don't have to modify my code at all, right? And I just like it's automatically injected. I think, and maybe Armin can correct me if I'm wrong here. I think Java has some concept of this in OpenTelemetry and possibly .NET, but it's honestly not a very mature story there in OpenTelemetry yet. For the most part, in most of the language implementations, you do need to do some level of manual work. And most of the time, what that means is during my application startup, I need to configure OpenTelemetry and configure instrumentations and stuff like that. But I don't need to then go and modify every single class in my application. So for example, in JavaScript, I can enable like the HTTP instrumentation and the Express instrumentation. And then anywhere where I make or receive an HTTP call and my Express application and router and all that are all automatically instrumented. So it's only like 5 lines of code to get all of that. So it's semi-automatic, I guess you would call it.
But from a developer perspective, this feels automated, right? I don't need to go into my code and find the places. So yeah,
at least you get some. Go on. You probably have better things to say than I do.
I was just going to say, of course, we want it to be as automatic as possible. Ideally, you wouldn't need to, change your code at all, configure anything, and we would just figure it out. But as the project matures, it'll hopefully get closer to that ideal scenario, but we're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, the Java agent is certainly one of the closest there because the JVM has built-in support or built-in hooks for monitoring agents, and so you don't even have to add a line and then recompile the entire app again, but you can just pass the auto instrumentation agent on the startup of the Java virtual machine. And then it wires up things automatically, and that's quite close to fully automatic instrumentation already.
And I wanted to ask, when it comes to going, harking back slightly to vendor lock-in, when we talk about languages like Python and Ruby, where for the most part that is SDK work, that is manually instrumenting your code, with this concept of automatic instrumentation, do you see anything on the horizon where it's is it either just run this batch script against your code and it's going to instrument the common things, or is there going to be some function built into some languages like that where it's unmanaged code that it's at least going to be able to pick up the ingresses and egresses and complete a span through that? What do those non-managed code bases look like on the landscape of automatic instrumentation?
Well, I mean, on an infinite time scale and assuming the success of the project and all of that, we would hope that it's built in as many places as possible. One really great example of this is actually .NET, which has built-in first-party support for OpenTelemetry directly into the runtime. So far, that's the only place where that's true. And it is really cool. It kind of does feel like magic when everything works the way that it's supposed to. And the more success the project has and the more users it has, the more incentivized library developers and such will be to build it in. And then once you attain some critical mass of libraries that have built-in support, it then makes sense for the runtime maintainers to look and say, our community, this is clearly something they care about, and maybe we can build in, if not like automatic support, then at least some features that enable it to be used more easily and stuff like that. I think this is all like really long timescale stuff. None of it's coming next year necessarily, but that is sort of the long-term vision of the project.
I would like to loop Armin a little bit into the loop. Armin, do we miss anything here when we talk about, because we initially, when we prepared for the talk, we wanted to make sure we give a good overview of where OpenTelemetry stands, where it came from. Anything else we miss that the audience should understand? Maybe also where it came from, so that we understand where we are.
Sure. So to the history of OpenTelemetry, there were two competing open source vendor agnostic instrumentation libraries, one being OpenTracing and one being OpenCensus, also with their upsides and downsides. And then I think OpenTracing was first published in 2016 and OpenCensus 2 years later, like 2018. And then in 2019, that's also when we came to the project. They were merged together and joined forces on OpenTelemetry. That's where we are right now.
Yeah. And is there still, I mean, just because I don't know, is there still some OpenTracing and OpenCensus out there because somebody put it in back then and they're still maintaining it somehow, or is this all converted over?
No, it's not converted over everywhere yet. So there will certainly be quite a few deployments with OpenTracing out there. But what OpenTelemetry provides and calls shims is some backwards compatibility support with both OpenTracing and OpenCensus to some extent.
Cool. And one question that I have, because I mean, at least Brian and I, we've been doing this instrumentation with our product for a while. And I remember in the early days, we always had the challenge to not misuse the power of instrumentation, which means in the old days, we had the option to configure rules to instrument every method in a certain package, right? And we call it the shotgun instrumentation, which meant we were just collecting a lot of information that nobody really needed unless you were the developer on the local machine. You really wanted to have everything, but then it broke everything later on. Are there, from your community work, are there best practices or are there any approaches how you can make sure that as a developer, I'm not instrumenting too many things, because too much of something doesn't help anybody either, right? If it becomes either overhead or also if you're capturing things that might even be information that is confidential. Is there any best practices or any discussion in this area in the community?
So if you're instrumenting things manually, if you're instrumenting your application or your library, then you will best know what kind of information is interesting and relevant. So you can identify the operations that you want to track, and then only cover these. So that's probably less of an issue. And for instrumentations that are provided, for example, by OpenTelemetry as separate instrumentation libraries, that is also taken care of. So when an HTTP client library is instrumented or an HTTP server library, then of course the focus is on the requests there and less on the internals. So the granularity there should be manageable.
And are you just aware, because Brian and I were both performance enthusiasts, do you know if especially for those libraries that are then heavily used in all sorts of applications, is there any performance testing that is done, instrumented versus uninstrumented? And just in case you happen to know if there's anything happening there.
I've seen some benchmarks in their respective language implementation repositories being performed, but I don't know if that's employed everywhere.
Yeah, I'm curious. I don't know if this is under any of your realms of expertise in this area, but Andy, you mentioned exposing data. So I'm curious as to what the OpenTelemetry security thought process is, right? If either in an OpenTelemetry project, I can possibly do this, or as a vendor, I might sneak into my code something that's going to expose something. Is there any sort of security review when these libraries maybe come through, or is it just, hey, yeah, take our word for it, it's good? Like, what's that risk that you might see? I mean, obviously there's risk with anything you use, vendor or not. Is there any, I don't know quite the word, but any approach to that within the OpenTelemetry project?
So the OpenTelemetry specification defines a, let's say, data model on how the collected telemetry should look like. We call these the semantic conventions, and they were written with that in mind, so that any potentially sensitive data should not be captured. But of course, you can encode, I don't know, credit card numbers and passwords in your URL query parameters or whatnot. So those have to be filled with care. But there is no inherent way of prohibiting or preventing any such sensitive data from being exposed in OpenTelemetry. That's something that the respective backends are to take care of. So you can send your data to a backend, and then it's up to the backend to make sure that only people who should have access to such data do have access, or that certain kinds of data are redacted entirely. But there were ideas floating around to mark data as sensitive at the point of collecting it. So when you instrument your code, you would say, I want to add this attribute to my trace or to my span, and I define this one as being sensitive, but that's in an early stage, and just that is floating around there.
Cool.
Guys, this now goes to both of you, and whoever wants to answer first. I know you've been both involved in that project for a while now, and we kind of learned now, again, the history and where we are. But what's more interesting, or not more, but also very interesting, is what's happening now, and what are you guys excited about in what's upcoming? What are the new cool things, or the things that are the innovation that is happening, the new features that are coming in, let's say, in the next 3, 6 to 12 months that will be beneficial for the community, that the community has been asking for? And whoever wants to go first.
Sure. So what's currently going on is that the metric specification was in large chunks rewritten. So we know that OpenTelemetry consists of 3 pillars, one being traces, one being metrics, and one being logs. Traces have been out for a while now, and now it was time to finish up the metric spec. It was actually just marked as stable last week. So that's part of the OpenTelemetry feature lifecycle. And now all of the language SDK implementations are catching up with the latest specification. And in the upcoming weeks, we should already see the first OpenTelemetry SDKs with a stable metric support being published. And that's nice to see. It took us quite a while, so it was underestimated at first how long it will take. So the roadmap that was anticipated initially would have reached some stability in the metric space in 2021 already, towards the end of the year, but that was not achievable. But now we are there, and no road bumps ahead that we would be aware of at this point.
Yeah, I think when we first started working on metrics, everybody looked at the community of contributors and said, we have a lot of really smart people from a lot of companies with a lot of experience, with a lot of good ideas, and everybody generally knows what they're doing, and we should get this banged out pretty quick. And then what happened was, when we started actually working on it, we had a lot of really smart people with a lot of really good ideas, and there ended up being a lot of debate about which good ideas should be, because some of them, you can have two ways to solve a problem that are both good ways, but have trade-offs. And a lot of times those debates just they take longer than you expect because both sides have merit. It's much easier to settle a debate when one side is clearly wrong or one side is clearly way better. But when you have, honestly, a really smart community that cares a lot, there are a lot of good solutions, and that can be as much of a cause of delays as mistakes that you've made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's the benefit and the pros and the cons of a democracy, right? I mean, that's...
we lovingly refer to it as the open source tax.
Yeah. And any future work? I mean, anything else we should highlight that beyond? It's great, obviously, that the metrics API is now, the spec is stable, and we see the SDKs. Anything else, people? Right? If we would speak again in, let's say, 3 to 6 months, and then you would say yes, and this is now here because we're getting close to this. What else is coming in the future?
Yeah. So of course, Armin already said the metric stability is a huge thing that's happening, like literally right now. We were just in a meeting talking about it. And in the next 3 months, 6 months, year, we're going to see more development of metrics. There were some features that were left out of the initial release in the interest of stability and timelines that we do want to finish and get out. So one example of that might be exemplars in metrics, which is a way of connecting your metrics and traces together so that your metrics are I guess what you would call tracing aware, which we're really excited about. And potentially like a hints API, which would be if I'm a library developer and I'm instrumenting my own code, I can provide a hint to the way that the SDK may be configured when the defaults maybe won't work for this use case. I can suggest different defaults, but then as the final end user, they can always override that hint. So that's kind of why we call it the hints API. And then similarly to making metrics tracing aware, there's been some work to do the same with logs, to apply trace and span IDs to logs in order to make them also tracing aware. So I guess again, talking more about long-term timelines, the goal of the project is to not have separate traces and metrics and logs, but to have one interconnected stream of data.
A smartscape, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. Armin, something you wanted to add?
One thing that will be added to tracing, for example, is also the consistent trace sampling. So consistent sampling of distributed traces across multiple processes or multiple realms with potentially differing sampling rates. That is also something that's currently in an experimental state and being prototyped.
Great. And if somebody wants to see also things in action, now our colleague Henrik Rexed, he has his YouTube channel, IsItObservable, and he recently did some sessions actually on OpenTelemetry, where he also explains, first of all, visually very nice, but then he also has some great tutorials. So folks, if you want to see what OpenTelemetry really looks like and how you can get this done on a sample lab, just check out IsItObservable as well. Armin, Daniel, I know you are both obviously relying on people that actually contribute to the project. And I think a community needs to grow. And therefore, I want to give you also the chance to say what and where should people go to in case they now listen to us and say, hey, this sounds like an interesting project. Are there good places to start with if they want to contribute in whatever form, right? Because there's code contribution, I guess there's documentation contribution. So any thoughts and where to get started?
So one great way of contributing would be to look up the project, get started with any tutorial that looks appealing to you, and then trying it out. And if there is anything that you notice that you don't like, then bring it up with us. So feedback, user feedback is on high demand in OpenTelemetry, and we would love to hear back from actual users trying it out. There is the CNCF Slack that everyone can sign up for, with a bunch of OTel prefixed Slack channels where you can reach out to the respective SDK maintainers for any questions or any issues. And of course, if something looks like a bug or anything, then make sure to raise an issue in the respective repository. That would be one great way of getting started with any kind of contribution. Then, of course, as always, documentation is something that can be worked on. And if you feel ready for the first code contribution, then you could look through the respective SDK implementations, and you will find some issues labeled with help wanted or good first issue, although those are not always applied, where you can get started by just mentioning that you would like to work on something. And if no one is already working on it in parallel, or if you think you can do it in a nicer way, then you can get started with that.
Awesome. It's amazing how fast time flies. I want to also be respectful to everyone's time here, but I also want to make sure we didn't miss anything that we want our listeners to know. So Dan, Armin, any things we missed, anything you want to make sure that people are still know about OpenTelemetry?
No, I think we did a pretty good job of covering the history of the project, where we're at, and where we're moving forward to, as well as how people can get involved. I would stress from a getting involved standpoint, what Armin mentioned about users and providing feedback. I think a lot of people, when they think about how can I contribute to an open source project, they always tend to think about how can I make code contributions, or how can I actually make changes to the project. But really, the most important community members are the users. So just using the project and providing feedback is immensely valuable, and I think the value of that is often lost, or at least not talked about. Where we can build whatever we think is cool, but if we never hear back from users that they like this or they don't like this, or they really have this gap that we need to fill, then all we're doing is building what we think people want or would use. So for me, the most valuable contributions are honestly just people using the project and then telling us where it can be improved.
And that lack of feedback is how you end up with Microsoft Bob.
How you end up with lots of things.
Now Armin needs to look up Microsoft Bob. I saw his face.
Yeah, it's not the paperclip that shows up in Word.
It came out of that, I believe. Clippy was if you go back to the Windows 98 theme packs, that was what ended up coming out of Microsoft Bob. But
I will hear no blasphemy against Clippy.
Oh, we all love Clippy, because if we didn't have Clippy, who could we complain about? The thing I'm most excited about, just wrapping up my last thought on this, I'm most excited to see the third-party integrations, where vendors are baking OpenTelemetry into their code, into their packages, so that everyone can use it. What I'm really curious to see is if there are any of the historically obtuse vendors, and I won't name names, but we all know some of them are out there, they'll either refuse to put OpenTelemetry into their code to help everybody out to monitor what's going inside, or if someone's going to be like, oh, this is a great idea, but we're going to do our own proprietary version of baking instrumentation into our code just because companies do that. It's going to be interesting to see how the political landscape of the larger code vendors or package vendors plays out. Obviously, when you're dealing with more open source based projects and packages of code, you're not going to have that. But there are these, large companies that maintain a lot of their own code, and I'm interested to see how they play along with that. Which ones really embrace it and say we have nothing to hide, and other ones who are going to be like, we're not going to let you see this,
So you're talking not at this point about observability vendors, but about application vendors.
Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I do think that as OpenTelemetry gets more momentum, it will be more and more difficult to say we're going to do our own thing.
Yeah.
Because as more tracing backends support it and more platforms support it, it hopefully will become an obvious value.
Yeah.
And even a competitive disadvantage if you don't
exactly. Because in the end, if the consumer demands it, the consumer of that software, because somebody needs to run it and then needs to troubleshoot and say, hey, I can go with you or with the other one, and the other one gives me better ways of operating your software, then I'll go with the other one because that's more valuable for me, maybe.
Yeah, there's always that behemoth mentality, though, of, again, vendor lock-in idea that, you're stuck using us, and we'll sell you services to analyze the code instead of allowing you to do your... Anyway, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I hope it doesn't go that route, but, there's one company I have in mind in particular, which I won't say, that I can see doing that kind of stuff, but, hopefully not. Hopefully I'll be proven wrong.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey,
Andy?
Dan, Armin, thank you so much for being on the show. And
thank you for having us.
And thanks for doing your work on OpenTelemetry, because you make all of our lives easier in the end.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Thank
you. And Brian, I hope I can also speak for yourself, but we want to make sure we invite them back in a couple of months.
Oh, yeah.
To see what's happening.
And Andy and Andy, speaking of the thanks, Andy and I come from a world where we always wished people took performance seriously. And it's amazing to see that there's this huge project now where people are taking performance seriously and things are going to be starting to be baked in eventually and all. So from that perspective, I thank you as well, because it's always been, passion of ours to see stuff working properly. Mm-hmm. So thanks to you guys and everyone else on the community and everyone using it and providing feedback. So yeah, we look forward to having you back. And anybody has any questions or comments? Andy, was there something else you want to say? I can see you looking. Okay, he had a look of anticipation. The problem with video. Thank you for everyone for listening. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, pure_DT on Twitter, or email us at pureperformance@dynatrace.com. We'll have a bunch of links to a lot of the things that Andy mentioned in the show notes. So thanks again for listening and making this all possible, everyone. And thank you to Armin and Daniel for being on our show today. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.